Okay, the third area where I'll talk about policy driving income upwards, copyrights and patents. You hear most people talk about it, hear most media talk about it. Copyrights and patents are like, they're just there. They're just given to us by nature. In fact, part of the so-called free trade agreements that we're always signing is we require developing countries to have stricter rules on copyright and patent protection. This is particularly important in the case of patent protection for prescription drugs, because in the case of developing countries at least, it very often will mean that if you have stricter patent protection for prescription drugs, you could be pushing up prices beyond the reach of large segments of their population. Obviously, a lot of people in this country have a hard time paying for their prescription drugs. But in developing countries where you have populations that might have per capita incomes of just a couple thousand a year, it's very hard to pay $500 for a prescription. Okay, so having patent protection could make a very big difference in terms of people's access to medicine, their ability to get good health care. Okay, but what's been remarkable in discussion of patents and copyrights is that the idea that these are government monopolies, which they are, I mean, they're by definition government monopolies, the idea that these are government monopolies rather than just sort of natural workings of the market is largely written out of the discussion. Okay? And it's a tremendously important difference because, taking the case of prescription drugs, the average price of a branded drug is over $100 per prescription. I'll hold Walmart. I don't usually like to hold Walmart up as a model. I'll hold them up as a model here. Walmart is selling hundreds of generic drugs at $4 a prescription. Okay, and the last time I looked, Walmart makes money. They're doing it. They could profitably sell drugs at $4 a prescription. Well, why are branded drugs going for over $100 a prescription? Walmart sells their generics for $4. Well, the branded drugs don't cost any more to produce, at least not on average, than the generic drugs. It's simply that the company has a monopoly. And if you need this drug, if you have some life-threatening disease and you need a drug to cure you or treat it, and you can afford it or your insurance will pay for it, you'll pay $100, you'll pay $200, you'll pay $500, you'll pay whatever you have to. So the reason that those drug prices are very high is because we've given Pfizer and Merck and the other companies government monopolies that allow them to charge very high prices. And the difference, a rough estimate, the difference between having those drugs all sold as generics, sold in a competitive market, and having patent protection, somewhere in the order of $180 billion a year. Okay, that comes to about $600 per person for every person in the country. Real money. Okay, so that's not a free market. That's pulling money out of people's pocket, giving it to the drug companies. Now, all of you are probably thinking, well, patents give companies an incentive to develop new drugs. And that's exactly right. Of course they do. But the point is, there are other ways to pay for the development of new drugs. One way, the government spends $30 billion a year on biomedical research through the National Institutes of Health. Okay, that's almost as much as the pharmaceutical industry claims to spend. Okay, so we already have another mechanism for financing research on prescription drugs. You could think of different ways to do it. Maybe you just want to double that. Maybe we should have the government spend $60 billion. They could contract out with the private sector. They don't have to do it themselves. In fact, most NIH research actually isn't done by NIH. They contract out. So you could actually have the government contract out with the private sector. They could pay Merck. They could pay, Pfizer, pay them to develop new drugs. But the difference would be that whatever gets developed is in the public domain, so Walmart could sell it at $4 a prescription. Okay, there'll be no patent monopolies. Okay, there are other ways. Joe Stiglitz, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, proposed having a prize fund. So you could say, okay, give Pfizer and Merck their patents, and if they turn out to be very useful drugs that extend people's lives, a lot of people benefit from them, give them a lot of money, get through this prize fund, but then still let the drug be sold at its, competitive market price in the public domain. Okay, there are different ways to do it. My point is simply that the patent system didn't just come down from heaven. This is a government policy. This is how we've chosen to reward innovation, to provide incentive for innovation. And I would argue it's probably about the worst way imaginable. And if economists were sort of true to their principles, I always have a good time with the trade economists because, they get really upset, if we have a 20% tariff on this shirt, they get really upset. That's so inefficient. You must be some sort of Neanderthal if you'd support a 20, You go, but wait a second. We're talking about drugs that would sell for $4 a prescription. They're instead going for $100 or more. Well, this is like a 2,000% tariff. How about that being inefficient? Oh, that's different. That's different. Okay, well, it's not different. I mean, there are different issues, obviously, with different products. but the point is it's a form of protection, and it's one that I would argue is very inefficient economically and also has very, very bad outcomes for people's health. But the most important point, for my purposes here, is that it's a form of protection, government intervention in the economy that redistributes income upwards from most people and their health bills to, Merck, Pfizer, and perhaps a small group of scientists that end up as big winners, because they happen to own a patent and could put a lot of money in their pocket. The exact same story with copyright. I won't go through the whole thing, but Bill Gates is an incredibly rich man, not because of the market. Bill Gates is an incredibly rich man because he has a copyright on Windows. Okay? And government will arrest, if I wanted to, I don't even have to sell it. If I just got to make it available. If I go, hey, I got Windows, here's a website, and you just download it, put it on your computer, same with, Excel, Word, whatever. Yeah, I'd get arrested. Bill Gates would send me a letter from his lawyer would send me a letter, you got to stop this. And if you don't do it, then they'll get an injunction from the judge, and if I ignore that, I go to jail. Okay, well, that's again, it's not a free market, it's a government monopoly. And again, we all understand, we want to give people an incentive for creative work. Okay, and what I would just argue is that there are other ways to do that. You have a lot of people that do creative work that aren't rewarded or aren't particularly well rewarded by copyright. For example, college professors, most of them have to, maybe their work isn't creative, you can decide that if you like, but most of them, as part of their responsibilities, have to publish, they have to do work, and maybe they'll occasionally get a few $100s for copyright, but that's not why they're doing it. Their job requires them to do some amount of publication, some amount of writing. So it's not as though we don't know other mechanisms, and I actually, in the book and some of my other writings, I talk about an idea of an artistic freedom voucher, that you'd have individuals have the option to pay money, basically a tax credit, to support creative and artistic work. The condition of receiving it is it's all in the public domain. So it takes advantage, sort of like say, let's take advantage of the web, put everything on the web and have it sent all over the world. Okay, well, I could go on, and I do go on in the book in other ways in which, the government ends up intervening in the markets, setting the rules. Just mention one, so a really big one that they manage to slip by us all the time. Corporations themselves. Where do corporations come from? Well, governments. Corporations don't exist in, you don't find them in a field. Corporations are a creation of the government. And that's a big deal because, I could sit down with someone here, we could form a partnership, we're going to set up a bookstore, we could be partners. And what that means is that, it's the two of us, or three of us, however many we have, pooling our money, we'll operate a business jointly. But a corporation has all sorts of privileges that are apart from what any two or three or any number of people can get separately. Most importantly, it has limited liability, so that if we set up our bookstore and it turns out that we didn't do a good job in building the structure and it falls down and, harms, however many people in the bookstore, well, we could just walk away and say, well, you could sue the bookstore, but we could walk away with our millions of dollars and you can't touch us because it's a limited liability corporation. Okay, and that, of course, has come up with like asbestos companies that have gone bankrupt because they can't pay everything they owe. All the workers are suffering from asbestosis. Okay, it comes up in many different contexts. That's just one of them. But one of the points I like to make in terms of a corporation being a creation of government, you probably have heard the story of double taxation, that a lot of conservatives are very upset about people who own stock, that they're being taxed twice because the corporation pays a tax on their profits, and then when they pay dividends out to the shareholders, it's taxed again, so it's supposed to be double taxation. I always like to flip that around and go, wait a second. Corporation is voluntary. No one forced anyone to set up a corporation. You don't think that the benefits that the government gives you from having corporate status are worth the corporate income tax, form a partnership. Okay, so in other words, everyone who pays the corporate income tax voted with their feet, that they think the benefits the government gave them from letting them set up a corporation were worth more than the corporate income tax that they have to pay. It's an entirely voluntary tax. Okay, so I love to use that with my libertarian friends.